Hey, how's everyone doing? Hope you are all good and welcome back to another reading. Yeah, I'm gonna start with one sec. I'm gonna start with going over some of the comments that I've been getting. I do appreciate the feedback and it's been really good actually. So I wanted to share some of them with you to start off on a good note. So yeah, there's a lady, or I don't know if it's a lady, but a person called Sansara. So they were asking. First of all, they said that. Let me try and find it. I had this already, but of course now that I'm on, I can't find it. Okay, so they said. Thank you so much for reading this and commenting. I really appreciate. You are so much better than an audiobook. So I was like, oh, cheers for that. They also were asking if I could go on every day, which unfortunately I can't. I'm afraid I come on when time and everything else allows. So that's how it is. But we are getting very near the end of this book. So I'm gonna say this is gonna be probably the second last reading. And yeah, the other comment that I wanted to make my comment on is someone commented, I really wish she would just read the book and not have like 13 minutes of BS before it. So I saw that comment and I was like, sounds like a troll to me. Like, if you don't like my commentary, that's fine. You don't need to comment. Like, obviously some people do like it because the videos keep getting more and more views. But also, it's not BS, okay? It is not BS. We have a book here, which is an account by a woman who is part of one of the biggest scandals. This is not just about sex. The things that are coming out in these emails, the inappropriate relationships, the inappropriate business, the money laundering that I was speaking about, that she has evidenced in this testimony, is all real. It has all been going on for decades, and the reckoning is happening right in front of our very faces. So it's not BS. It's not BS to find out that our police protect this kind of activity, protect this kind of behavior, wave people through to secure locations. They're paid to do a job, which is to check on people's identity, and they're obviously not doing that. They're not recording the comings and goings of people like Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted offender, to the palace of our royal family, which we pay for. Meanwhile, as I said, the royal family are money laundering, and Jeffrey Epstein was arranging it. So I don't think it's BS. Okay, so that's why I talk about it. I might not be the best person speaking about it. I've already said that. I'm not used to it. I'm not used to speaking about politics. I'm not used to being live. You know, I prefer to be talking to someone else or reacting to something or reading, but I still think it's important because people miss this stuff. you know, I don't read the papers, but every time I go into a supermarket, the papers are there. Like, I look at some of the headlines that they put on them every day, and people still buy them. I see people going to buy the paper and reading the paper. They're just filling their heads with bullshit. So, yeah, I don't think that what I talk about is bullshit. I think that's bullshit, and I think that people should start understanding what is happening to them and what has been happening for a long time. On that note, I'm going to carry on. Yeah, I also made a video which showed this former MP in our country who was talking about how he has demanded to have a debate about the royals and their finances, not only where they get their money, the fact that they do not pay tax, but the fact that they receive cash donations from countries. By the way, these countries that they're doing business with, these are countries that have been ruled by official organizations like the UN to be sanctioned, to be people that we are not doing business with. But yet these people are coming in doing secret business deals, giving them money to get past worldwide regulations. I just don't know how you can think that's bullshit. I don't know. Yeah, so I made a video showing this guy because he put it into much better wording than me. I also showed a testimony of a former police officer who worked in the royal family talking about how he had to let Ghislaine Maxwell in, how she was sat in the royal grounds having a picnic, and how it was thought that she was in an intimate relationship with Andrew. This was exactly the time, 2000, when they introduced him to Virginia Giuffre. So unfortunately, that part of the video got copyright claimed, but you can still see the first bit. If you don't, you know, just to show that I'm not talking about bullshit, just to show that there are other people that are saying this is fact. It's not just me waffling. Anyway, let me get started. Have we got any comments? Good evening, Austin. My main supporter in life. Thank you. I know you appreciate my wafflings, but I just thought it was rude. And, you know, I entertain trolls. They're part of having a channel, but I just couldn't believe, I just thought, really? Really? Do you really believe it's bullshit? Like, come on now. Okay, let's get into it. Chapter 30, A Reckoning Begins. Whether talking to journalists, working with law enforcement, or filing lawsuits, so many brave women have stood up to Epstein and Maxwell. But when each of them first decided to do so, I can guarantee every single one felt terrified and alone. While I'd been in Epstein and Maxwell's world, they'd safeguarded their evil enterprise by stoking rivalries, strategically keeping girls from forging alliances. In their presence, then, we'd been kept at odds with each other, and even after I'd escaped, I still felt isolated for a long, long time. Now, however, as I learned of other women who had come forward, that solitary feeling was starting to lift. I knew about Courtney Wild from the CVRA case, and it turned out there were two sisters, Annie and Maria Farmer, who had been trying for nearly 2 decades to expose what Epstein and Maxwell had done to them. As word spread that there were a handful of lawyers representing a growing number of Epstein's victims and getting results, more women were choosing to break their silence. In October 2016, for example, a South African woman named Sarah Ransom called Paul Castle. She told him that she too had been a victim of Epstein and Maxwell in 2006 and 7. She said she'd been following my story in the media and had found the Facebook page of my non-profit Victims Refuse Silence, the one Brad had helped me found in 2014. Ransom said she wanted to assist my case in any way she could. Paul gathered my legal team in a room at Boys Schiller Flexner, and they called Sarah back in Barcelona, Spain, where she was living. She said she'd been abused by Epstein and Maxwell in various locations beginning when she was 22. Specifically, she said that Epstein had R-worded her repeatedly while on his island, and that Maxwell facilitated it, while also starving, berating, and swindling her. Remember the girl that she said was in the kitchen, the 15-year-old that was shaking, and Maxwell had stolen her passport? There's all these little details really give credibility to these people's stories, but yet there are groups of people trying to discredit them. Like me, she had photographs of herself with them. She hadn't been a minor during this period, but what had happened to her was still wrong. In early 2017, right before a 10-year statute of limitations was about to expire, Boys Schiller Flexner filed a lawsuit on Sarah Ransom's behalf against Epstein and Maxwell. The charge: violation of the federal trafficking statute, which prohibits the recruiting, enticing, transporting, or soliciting of someone for intercourse by means of fraud, force, or coercion. Before I settled with Maxwell, Ransom had flown to New York to serve as a witness in my defamation case. While the mounting number of cases against Epstein and Maxwell was heartening, however, there were indications that public awareness of their crimes was either fading or had never been very high in the first place. Donald Trump was now president, and in early 2017, he nominated Alexander Acosta, the former federal prosecutor based in Miami, who had approved Epstein's shameful, secretive, non-prosecution agreement, to be Secretary of Labor. I knew it had something to do with employment. Acosta was confirmed in 2017. At the same time, accounts describing the mistreatment of women in America were multiplying. Fox News anchor Gretchen Carlson filed a SH suit against her boss, Roger Ailes. Uber employee Susan Fowler went public about toxic masculinity at the ride-sharing company, causing its CEO to resign. I forgot about that. It was as if all this bad behavior were a surging river and a dam was about to break. Then it did. On October 5th, 2017, the New York Times ran the first of several articles by Jodi Cantor and Megan Toohey. Megan Toohey wrote the We Can Bury Anyone in Hollywood article, which showed Justin Baldoni had been running a hostile set on the movie It Ends With Us, and exposed all the text messages that were used to smear Blake Lively because she complained about SH. See how this is all fitting together? About the movie mogul Harvey Weinstein's serial harassment and assault of women. And their sources' allegations were backed up by on-the-record quotes. 5 days later, the New Yorker's Ronan Farrow wrote of several more women who Weinstein had victimized, and Farrow too was just getting started. He would soon shine light on several of Weinstein's associates who sought to silence Weinstein's victims. Among them, one of my own attorneys, David Boies, who had represented Weinstein and had personally signed a contract directing a private investigative firm to attempt to uncover information that would stop the publication of a New York Times story about Weinstein's abuses. Gosh. Boies later said this had been a mistake. So you can make mistakes. It is allowed. It is allowed. What isn't allowed is when you make a mistake and you don't admit to it, because then it just creates toxicity. Boies later said this has been a mistake. While his firm didn't select or direct the investigative firm, he said, and he characterized the arrangement as an accommodation for a client, he took personal responsibility for the error, which he said was not thought through. So, just in case anyone wants to take further interest in that, I made a video 2 months ago which shows it has an image of Harvey Weinstein and it says Harvey Weinstein's playbook on the thumbnail, and it basically shows how the latest smear campaign that we saw against Blake Lively goes back to an agency called Black Cube that was hired by Weinstein. So I'm not sure if this is what he's talking about, but anyway, you can see it in that video. Sorry about the sniffing, by the way. I don't know why that's going on. Probably because it's been really cold today. Back in 2006, when an activist named Tarana Burke had founded a non-profit to serve survivors of SH and abuse, Burke had called her movement Me Too. Now, 11 years later, the actress Alyssa Milano took to Twitter and encouraged survivors of sexual harassment and assault to post Me Too as a status update. The response from women around the world was enormous. 2 days later, the first of more than 150 gymnasts who'd been abused by USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar went public. I forgot about this. 150 gymnasts. It was hard not to hope that real change was coming. On the home front, things were good. Robbie and I used part of my Maxwells settlement to buy a 4-bedroom house in a gated community just north of Cairns. After more than 2 years as renters, we were homeowners once again. We lived on a street named Iridescent Drive, which was fitting because at times the place, which had a lovely swimming pool in the backyard, seemed to shimmer. We had an outdoor kitchen, and during hot, muggy weather, which there is a lot of in Cairns, we pushed open our accordion doors and let the breeze cool the house. In mid-2017, my kids were no longer babies. Alex was 11, Tyler was 10, and Ellie was 7. And more, I was noticing that each was special in his or her own way. Alex was beginning to write rhymes that he would eventually turn into rap music. Tyler was an artist who could draw anything, and Ellie loved to regale us with fanciful stories. While she aspired to be a firefighter more than a writer then, she was becoming a great raconteur. I admired my kids and was grateful for what they taught me every day, which is why I got it into my head that we should make our family bigger. In Cairns at that time, there was a campaign to streamline the process of finding homes for children in Queensland's foster care system. I'd seen brochures about the programme called Foster to Adopt at the kids' school, and the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to be part of it. Our family was so fortunate and had so much to give. Having slept in foster homes during my time at Growing Together, I knew how bad it felt to lack a safe permanent home. I proposed the idea of adopting to Robbie, who I suspected would be open to it since his own father had been adopted as a child. When my husband said yes, we submitted an application, and before we knew it, we'd passed the home evaluation. Robbie and I took a required class to get educated about the challenges some foster kids might have. I mean, I would think she would have a pretty good idea. And right away, we were matched with a 3-year-old girl. Her father was absent, we were told, and her mother was in prison and had decided to give her up for adoption. I knew with all my heart that we should give this little girl a home. But then Siggy called. She needed me to travel to the United States again. That's the female lawyer that's been handling her defamation suit with Ghislaine Maxwell, which they settled on. I can't remember what the reason was. It's possible that it was for a deposition in one of my survivor's sister's cases, but I do remember it was urgent. I had 3 days to get there. As I began packing, Robbie said we needed to talk. Jenna, you know I love kids, but you've been the one pushing us to adopt, he said. I'm on board, but it's you who really wants to give back like this. But if you're not going to be here, he hesitated, which is rare for him. Finally, he said, it's just not fair. You need to commit to one thing or the other. I understood the choice he was laying out for me. Keep on fighting to expose Epstein's cabal, or step back, adopt a new daughter and stay home with my expanding family. It's either this or that, he said. I knew Robbie was right, even though I didn't want him to be. The tension between my desire to be an activist and my desire to put my family first was always there for me. But in this instance, it required that I make a stark choice. I wanted to do both, especially now that I knew of a particular child whom we could help. I yearned to do so, but at the same time, what I'd started with Siggy was nowhere near done, and seeing it through wherever it took us would potentially help other young women and girls. So I made my choice, and a few days later, got on the plane to the States. To this day, I think about that little girl I never met and wonder how all our lives would be different if she had joined our family. Oh, that's so cute. It was during this period that Julie K. Brown, an investigative journalist at the Miami Herald, began digging into the Epstein case. Here we go. Interesting, isn't it, that it's 2 women journalists that went for it when it came to investigating Epstein, although it was a female journalist that tracked Virginia down, but she didn't seem like the best person. She has said that she was prompted in part by Alex Acosta's elevation to Trump's cabinet and by the fact that during Acosta's confirmation hearings, Epstein's name had barely come up. The Miami Herald's investigations editor gave Brown the go-ahead and assigned a videographer, Emily Michaud, to work with her to capture interviews with Epstein's victims on tape. In early 2017, they recorded their first emotional on-camera interview with Michelle Licata, who'd been SA'd by Epstein when she was just 14. They would later conduct similar videotaped interviews with Courtney Wild and Jenna Lisa Jones, who was 14 when Epstein fondled her during a massage and paid her $200 afterward. And Brown and Michaud wanted to record a conversation with me. I think those girls, I used their pictures in one of the thumbnails that I made. And for anyone who's interested, the first video I made about Virginia Guiffre, which was after she passed away, I think I used some of their testimonies in that video. So yeah, if anyone wants to check that out, it's still there. Because the Miami Herald, they did an excellent job with this. And that article is still online as well, by the way. In early 2018, David Boies and Siggy met with Brown, who told them she was determined to get the sealed court records of my defamation case against Maxwell unsealed. In her experience, victims of SA often wanted to keep the details of what happened to them private, so she was expecting pushback, but my lawyers told her she'd get no opposition from us. The more light she could shine on the darkest corners of Epstein's evil world, the better, we said. In March 2018, I sat down for a video interview with Brown. We'd meet more than once, but at the end of that first interview, I told her I was fighting not just for myself, but for every Epstein victim. I'm not going to stop, I said, until all these girls get justice. When I said all these girls, I was quite consciously including those I was sure Epstein was continuing to abuse in the present day. Remember, he was a free man who, despite being a convicted S offender, was still unrepentant about his taste for minor girls. We know this without a doubt because in mid-August 2018, Epstein invited a New York Times reporter named James Stewart to his Manhattan townhouse for a chat. The meeting was on background, which meant Stewart could only use whatever information he gleaned if he didn't attribute it directly to Epstein. Readers of the New York Times wouldn't know this, however, until 3 days after Epstein's death in 2019. In an article titled "The Day Jeffrey Epstein Told Me He Had Dirt on Powerful People," Stewart explained that his promise to keep their conversations on background had expired because Epstein was deceased. This is crazy. This is crazy. During their conversation, ostensibly about Elon Musk, whose business dealings Stewart was investigating, Epstein offered an off-topic aside, calling the criminalization of intercourse with teenage girls a cultural aberration. He supported his belief by noting that at certain times in history, it had been seen as acceptable. Epstein compared the vilification of men who did it with minor girls to the way gay and lesbian people had been treated for decades. There's just no end to this guy's. This guy is sick. Homosexuality, he noted, had long been considered a crime and was still punishable by death in some parts of the world. Clearly, Epstein still felt righteous about having with whomever he pleased, regardless of age. I did not know that that was how that agenda started, because I've seen that conversation going on, and I've seen it going on in commentary spaces on live streaming channels to young boys. But it started with Epstein and the New York Times. In November 2018, Brown's series of articles, accompanied by Micho's videos, went live. The series was called Perversion of Justice, and in it, Brown revealed the behind-the-scenes maneuvering that had led to Epstein's non-prosecution agreement, zeroing in on Acosta's role in it. She uncovered 80 victims of Epstein, some as young as 13 when the abuse occurred, and revealed the campaign of terror that Epstein and his cronies had used to try to silence those victims. Remember when that car shined its headlights on our front door in Colorado? Well, Brown found a victim in Florida who'd endured the same kind of hazing. Finally, the series documented the experience of 8 survivors in detail, with on-the-record interviews. I was among them. The series was fantastic, in no small part because of Micho. Her videos forced readers of Brown's hard-hitting reporting to see all of us who'd survived Epstein and Maxwell's abuse as human beings. The Hollywood Reporter noted the videos acted as something of a force multiplier, creating a 3-dimensional platform for Epstein's teenage victims to tell their harrowing stories. Brown's series drove over 9.5 million unique visits to the Miami Herald website, while Micho's videos were watched 850,000 times on the paper's website alone, and millions more times on YouTube. You're just thrown into a world that you don't understand, I said in one video, describing what I and so many others had gone through with Epstein and Maxwell. And you're screaming on the inside, and you don't know how to let it come out. And you just speak. And you just become this numb figure who refuses to feel and refuses to speak. All you do is obey. That's it. Brown has rightly been credited with refocusing the attention of the public and of law enforcement on Epstein and Maxwell's heinous acts. We now know that not long after the Herald ran Brown's first story, the US Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York opened an investigation into Epstein. I will always be grateful for what Brown and Michaud did for the countless women who'd been victimized, first by Epstein and Maxwell, but then again by their own government. That part. That part. If you're going to make laws, if you're going to make it a criminal act to make a teenage girl, and this is some of these men were in their 70s, 50s, 60s. These girls were petrified. If you're going to make that into a criminal act, then you need to follow through with making sure that they're seen as criminals. Otherwise, what is the point of making the law? This has just been going on for too long. Going on for too long. Bribing people, getting out of, paying your way out of accountability. And now look where we are. Because it wasn't just about sex. It's about all the other, it's about the financial crimes that have been going on. War crimes. That's how deep it is. It's so, so, so deep. There's no end to it. Let me start that bit again. Oh no. I also have to thank Brown with helping me understand that despite the problems I'd had with members of the tabloid media, working with good journalists could do a lot of good. More and more, I began to make myself available to reporters who reached out. Maybe if I spoke more about what all of us had been through, I thought I could help increase awareness and prevent other young girls and women being abused. It's been said that no good deed goes unpunished. However, and apparently someone thought it was high time I be punished. At some point in this period, the FBI called me in Australia to say there had been a credible threat on my life. The agent told me that Robbie and I should contact the Australian Federal Police immediately. I called right away, but kept getting transferred from one person to the other. I was so scared that I was shaking. Robbie stood next to me as I waited on hold, determined to stay on the phone until someone helped us. But after explaining myself over and over, only to be transferred again, I was out of patience. That's when Robbie stepped in. Start packing, he told me. I've got a plan. From the earliest days of our relationship, Robbie had been my protector, my saviour even. Now he was going to deliver us from danger once again. He rented a large mobile home and loaded the kids, the dogs, and me into it. Within a few hours, we had hit the road heading north. I didn't think I could maneuver that big of a vehicle, so Robbie drove for 8 hours straight. We ended up in a one-horse town at the top end of Queensland, not far from Cape Melville National Park. The town had no grocery, just a convenience store where we could buy milk and bread, but it was completely off the grid, which was what we needed most. There we would stay, cooking and sleeping in our RV, swatting mosquitoes and occasionally fishing for 3 weeks. How do you decide when a credible threat to your life is no longer dangerous? The answer is you don't. There simply comes a time when you resume normal routines. When we returned to Cairns, we let the local police know what the FBI had told me. Robbie and I tried to make the kids feel safe, even though we weren't certain that they were. Day and night, I worried that my family would be harmed by the very people who had hurt me when I was a teenager. And in addition to fear, I felt rage. How entitled and selfish do you have to be to continue hounding and threatening the very victims you've hurt before? It drove me crazy to think these people could potentially get away with silencing me for good. When someone on Twitter speculated that the FBI might kill me to protect the ultra rich and well connected, I felt the need to respond. If I died suddenly, I tweeted, no one should believe that it was an accident. I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape, or form am I suicidal. I typed hastily but resolutely, making several spelling and grammatical errors that I've corrected here. I have made this known to my therapist and GP. If something happens to me, for the sake of my family, do not let this go away and help me to protect them. Too many evil people want to see me quieted. Let me take a pause. Yeah, I understand why a lot of people like brought that tweet up when it was said that she had taken her own life. But I think reading it in that context, we have to remember that her circumstances had changed a lot. I think that the abuse by her husband was increasing. And yeah, she doesn't really talk about that so much in the book, but anyway, someone did say that is conjecture, and yes, it is conjecture, but that's why my channel is called Go Do Your Own Research, because I do research and I do show you the sources and where I got the information from. And that's how I try to debunk misinformation. And there were certain channels that want you to believe still that she did not take her own life. And when you see who they invite onto their platform, you have to start seeing the bigger picture. That's all I'm saying. Good evening, Diamond Media. Nice to see you. Okay, let me have a sip of water. I did see actually yesterday, because obviously I'm quite invested in this, in what is going on with the Epstein files now. So it's become somewhat of a political well, there are politicians lobbying. It's a political sticking point. And so I saw them yesterday, some of the victims that are mentioned just now were giving speeches. It was very emotional with a couple of the congressmen, I think they are. I'm not too sure. I'm not 100% up on my US politics, but I think there's a guy called Roe Connor and Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think her name is, and they've always been very pro-Trump. and they've sort of rebelled against the party. They've rebelled against the party line. This Epstein files has become such a huge moment for them. But yeah, so I watched the speeches because I think it's really important we listen to victims. Forget about the politics, put that to the side. I don't like that it becomes political, but I see how it has to be to move forward. But yeah, I saw her brother Skydie or Sky, and he was getting very emotional in his speech. So it's obviously still very, very raw for him. That's what I think anyway. I think he must have been feeling emotional because he wished his sister could have been there to see this moment. Thank you. Oops. I appreciate everyone, honestly, because I wanted to have people that I could share getting through this book with. That was really my motivation. I had no idea what to expect when I started reading this book, and it has been a ride. Okay, chapter 31, A Taste of Justice. In July 2019 came a day I'd hoped for but had never thought I'd see. I remember Siggy calling me. It was early Sunday morning in Australia. You're not going to believe this, she said. Do you have a chair? Because you're going to need to sit down. On July 6th, Jeffrey Epstein had been arrested on federal charges related to sex trafficking, she said. He'd been apprehended after his private jet touched down at New Jersey's Teterboro Airport. I can imagine the scene, having flown into Teterboro so many times myself with Epstein. Touching my face, I realised I was crying. We would soon learn so much more. At almost the same moment Epstein was taken into custody, federal agents had raided his New York townhouse. Inside, they found hundreds, if not thousands, an extraordinary volume, prosecutors said, of nude photographs of young-looking women. These were the tokens this super predator had kept to remind himself of all those he'd abused over the years. They also found a safe containing 48 loose diamonds, $70,000 in cash. Wonder where those diamonds came from. $70,000 in cash and 3 passports belonging to Epstein from the United States, from Israel, and from Austria. That last one, which was expired, appeared to have a photo of Epstein, but included a fake name and listed a home address in Saudi Arabia. This was a man who'd prepared a getaway plan. On July 8th, Jeffrey Berman, US Attorney for the Southern District of New York, unsealed an indictment alleging that Epstein and his employees brought dozens of vulnerable girls, some as young as 14, to his New York mansion and his Palm Beach home between 2002 and 2005. Epstein stood accused of abusing these girls, paying the money, and asking some of them to recruit other girls. Noting that this had gone on for years, Berman said that the alleged behaviour shocks the conscience. Epstein faced a maximum sentence of 45 years in prison. Epstein's bail hearing was a week later. I wished I could attend, if only to see Epstein in shackles. That's true. That's true. We didn't really see any imagery of him shackled or in his prison gear. Unlike Luigi Mangione, they made sure to show us pictures of him. But Brad Edwards assured me that other survivors would be there to represent all of us. Courtney Wild, Michelle Licata, and Annie Farmer did indeed attend, and the judge let them speak. First Farmer and then Wild stood up and briefly described how much harm Epstein had done. If nothing else, Wild said, the judge should keep him behind bars for the safety of any other girls. Epstein's attorneys offered to put up hundreds of millions of dollars if only the judge would allow him to post bail and go home. But prosecutors argued that he must remain in custody because he had the means and the motive to flee. A financial disclosure from Epstein was required to fill out after his arrest had listed his net worth as, you ready for this? Any guesses? 559 million 129,054. Wait, is that right? 559 million 129,554. Anyway, nearly 600 million, including 6 properties, stocks, equities, and 57 million in cash. Not bad for someone who did he get a college degree, or I don't think he did. Okay, I've missed a footnote from somewhere, but it says later it would become clear, in case anyone doubted it, that when he was arrested, Epstein had likely still been keeping company with minor girls. 2 weeks before Epstein's arrest, the US Marshals Service had interviewed an air traffic control employee who reported seeing Epstein as recently as November 2018 disembarking from his jet with girls who appeared to be as young as 11 or 12. I mean, remember, he wasn't just getting these girls for him, was he? Three days later, Judge Richard M. Berman ruled no bail for Epstein. The next day, on July 19th, Alexander Acosta, whose role in the 2008 non-prosecution agreement was now being viewed more harshly, resigned from Trump's cabinet. What happened to him then? Does anyone know? Let me know in the chat. 4 days after that, on July 23rd, Epstein was written up for self-mutilation and was put in a suicide watch cell. But 31 hours later, that assessment was downgraded to something less restrictive, psychological observation, and later still he was returned to a normal cell. Prison records show that on 2 occasions, while in custody, he described himself as a coward and as someone who does not like pain.
Wow. He was fine with inflicting it on other people, though, wasn't he? On August 9th, 2019, my 36th birthday, a judge made public the first of what would soon be several batches of previously sealed documents in my defamation case against Maxwell. This batch, roughly 2,000 pages in all, included excerpts of several depositions, including my own, and these excerpts made clear that in 2016, under oath, I had named not only formerly Prince Andrew and Jean-Luc Brunel among my abusers. We know that Epstein was still in contact with Andrew in 2018 by the emails. And he was trying to arrange a deal with some Chinese business. And there was a report about that, I remember, a few months ago. Just saying. Bullshit. Not bullshit. As I had in my 2014 joinder notion. But also Marvin Minsky, the MIT scientist, Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico, and others. My sworn testimony naming billionaires number 1, 2, and 3 would be made public in various document dumps, and they all denied knowledge of and participation in Epstein's trafficking scheme. Where would she get those names from, though? Do you know what I mean? Come on. They were all, if you weren't in those circles, those would have been very obscure names. Siggy and I had a joke. We often told each other if we were frustrated that one of our cases seemed stalled. All we needed to do was send Siggy on vacation. Whenever she tried to take a break with her family, something big would happen. In August 2019, Siggy flew to Africa to take her kids on safari. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised then when early on a Sunday morning, Siggy found a satellite phone and called me in Australia. Just hours before, on Saturday, August 10th, guards had entered Epstein's cell inside the high security unit of the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan to bring him breakfast. Instead, they found his lifeless body, a bedsheet tied around his neck. Epstein was dead at the age of 66. The news hit me with an almost physical force. I guess I didn't believe someone who'd exerted so much power over me could ever die. I know you're disappointed, Siggy said, and she was right. This wasn't how justice was supposed to work, with the accused avoiding a reckoning by taking himself out. Some might imagine that I'd be happy that Epstein was dead, but I wasn't. Indeed, it would take time for me to realise that I was in mourning. Not because the world had lost a monster. That was a good thing. No. Like all of Epstein's victims, I was grieving the death of my ability to hold him accountable for what he had done. As the details came out, nearly everything about Epstein's death seemed fishy. Even Attorney General William Barr would acknowledge he initially had suspicions that Epstein had been killed off. Instead, he concluded otherwise, that Epstein's death was a result of a perfect storm of screw-ups. There was the fact that Epstein had tried to harm himself before, but then been taken off watch. While he'd had a cellmate at some point, on the night of his death, he did not have one. 2 prison guards, who sat at a desk just 15 feet from Epstein's cell, were supposed to check on him every half hour from 10:30 to 6:30 a.m. Instead, they napped and browsed the internet, then falsified the logs to say they'd completed their rounds. Security cameras that could have captured Epstein's self-harming behaviour, or, if conspiracy theorists are to be believed, the actions of whoever killed him were not functioning. Other cameras that were working showed that no one had entered the area where Epstein was housed on the night he died. So that seemed to rule out the possibility of an assassin sneaking in. But then his brother hired a forensic pathologist to examine the official autopsy report. That expert concluded that the broken bones and cartilage in Epstein's neck pointed to homicide. I can make a case for either suicide or murder. This was a man who bragged about his access to power. By this point in his life, he was known to have relationships with not just pretty young girls and brainiac scientists, but also the likes of Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, James Jess Staley, the CEO of Barclays Bank, and Leon Black, the co-founder and CEO of the private equity firm Apollo Global Management. According to court documents, Epstein also knew Google co-founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page well enough to have introduced them and others to Staley. In addition to his self-described biological need for intercourse, Epstein needed to feel important, and collecting such high-profile acquaintances had helped him feed that hunger. Now being in jail meant having no access to either the young girls he loved to abuse or the powerful men he yearned to rub shoulders with. That certainly could have made him want to end it all. On the other hand, Epstein was the ultimate narcissist. He believed he was superior to others, and I never saw him in a scintilla of self-doubt, let alone a desire for self-annihilation. He'd always suggested to me that those videotapes he so meticulously collected in the bedrooms and bathrooms of his various houses gave him power over others. He explicitly talked about using me and what I'd been forced to do with certain men as a form of blackmail, so these men would owe him favours. Let me just read that bit again. He'd always suggested to me that those videotapes he so meticulously collected in the bedrooms and bathrooms of his various houses gave him power over others. He explicitly talked about using me and what I'd been forced to do with certain men as a form of blackmail. So these men would owe him favours. Could it be that someone who feared exposure by Epstein had found a way to exterminate him? I know that the official findings, including an Inspector General's report issued in June 23, say this is impossible, but I will never be entirely convinced. I mean, he was dealing with some very deadly... These people are literally guilty of war crimes. The people he was dealing with are literally guilty of war crimes. They've not been found guilty, but they should be tried for war crimes. So is it such a stretch to believe that a prison with limited staff numbers and a system that clearly wasn't functioning right, it could have happened? It's definitely a high possibility. I don't really know what to make about his brother, because his brother was in on this. His brother was on the plane. His brother was in on his operation. So it's really hard to take what his brother says seriously or feel bad for him, really. That's one thing I will say. We need a whistleblower. I'll tell you one thing, though. While I've read that Epstein was buried in an unmarked grave not far from his parents in Palm Beach, Florida, I don't believe that at all. Epstein had repeatedly told me exactly what would happen when he died. His body would be placed in some sort of cryogenic chamber to be preserved until technology advanced far enough to bring him back to life. Oh my God. He is the definition of what is so commonly used, the word narcissist. Honestly, that should be his face in the dictionary. That's what he'd always brag to me, with that satisfied smirk on his face. I know it sounds far-fetched, but I wouldn't bet against the notion that he somehow got his way on this. Mate, if there was money involved, then I can believe it. Investigators would soon discover that on August 8th, 2 days before his death, Epstein had placed his entire fortune into a trust. The 1953 trust, apparently named for his birth year, in the Virgin Islands. This legal maneuver would be widely interpreted as Epstein's final thumbing of his nose at those who'd survived his predation, because it made it much more difficult for his victims to get restitution. Even after death, Epstein seemed to be asserting control. I read something earlier, or I was listening to something earlier about the emails that he was texting a member of parliament from the Virgin Islands at a Congress meeting while the meeting was going on to give them his advice. Corruption beyond belief. Because for one thing, where is all this money? How did he make all this money? It was oddly heartening, therefore, when another photo emerged in the public realm that refocused the narrative not on Epstein's manoeuvring, but on his perversity. taken by a party photographer in 2001. The image is ostensibly of Naomi Campbell. The lens zeroes in on her in a black leather bikini and a mesh black wrap, arriving at her 31st birthday bash on that yacht I've told you about in Saint-Tropez. But despite her undeniable beauty, the supermodel wasn't the reason this photo ran in the New York Post on August 13th, 2019, 3 days after Epstein's death. I was. Jeffrey Epstein's slave, seen at Naomi Campbell's birthday party in 2001, blared the headline atop the photo, which had also appeared a day earlier in, guess which paper? England's Daily Mail. And with that, a single image reminded the world just how childlike the girls in Epstein's world were required to look. I'm caught in the foreground, clearly by accident, an awkward smile on my face, my long blonde hair falling down my back. I am looking away, and my pink sleeveless top reveals a slender arm and a bare shoulder. I am 17 years old, and right next to me, partially obscured, with only her dark hair and a sliver of her cheek visible, is Maxwell. Later, I would meet a fellow Epstein survivor who would tell me this photograph was the reason she had broken her silence and come forward with her own story. The photo said something 1,000 words couldn't, she said. Everyone knew that was a child. And by that, she meant me. It's true, she looks so out of place in that photo. She looks so much younger, noticeably so much younger than everyone else. Okay, we've got a reply about Alexandra Acosta. Since March of 2025, Alexandra Acosta has been a member of the board of directors of Newsmax, a cable company based in Boca Raton, Florida. He serves as its audit committee chair. Great. It's good to know that's who's in charge of media sources. Like I said, it is never ending. Okay, guys, am I going to do 1 or 2 more chapters? Let's see. Chapter 32. Survivors' Sisters Unite. For decades, New York State had among the most restrictive laws in the nation when it came to punishing those who'd SA'd children. Victims had to file civil lawsuits by their 23rd birthdays or lose their chance altogether. But that changed in early 2019 when the legislature passed the Child Victims Act, which gave victims until age 25 to file claims against the institutions or individuals they blamed for their suffering. So you can see now how we've had the change in the law, the Me Too movement, the rise of content creation and social media all coming together to produce this new in this new landscape where we have victims coming forward and being given an opportunity to expose people that abuse them. That very thing has been abused by grifters and people working in collaboration with lobbying groups and think tanks that control our media. This is not a conspiracy. I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this is happening every day. And thanks to a look back window written into the law, for 1 year, starting on August 14th, victims of all ages could sue, even if the statute of limitations had passed. It seemed fitting that 4 days after Epstein's death, that look back window opened. And later, because of the pandemic, that window would be extended for another year, allowing victims to file claims until August 14th, 2021. This was the kind of legislative change that victims' rights advocates had long been pushing for. Increasingly, research was bolstering their arguments. For example, Child USA, a non-profit focused on child abuse prevention, conducted a study of thousands of abuse victims who had been Boy Scouts. Only half of those came forward because they were 50. More and more, the public was coming to understand that being SA'd as a child could take decades to process, and it could take even longer than that for a victim to imagine speaking publicly about that experience and naming his or her abuser. Just pause for 1 second. How many times have you seen comments on videos and on social media where people have said, why didn't they go to the police? Why didn't they report it at the time? Because legally there would have been no point. If you ask me, statutes of limitations should be abolished entirely for cases involving the SA of children. 100%. Children shouldn't have to go through this. It's... Let me not get started. But this look back window in New York State was a step in the right direction, and it was particularly a boon for Epstein's victims, so many of whom had been abused in Manhattan. Over the next 2 years, several of us would take advantage of the window to file claims that would otherwise have been impossible. But first, we had a hearing to attend. On August 19th, 2019, the US Attorney's Office had filed a document to withdraw the charges against Epstein since he was deceased. Usually, this results in a dismissal of the case, but as soon as the judge signs it, in an unusual move, however, Judge Berman, big up Judge Berman, said that he was aware that Epstein's death had robbed his victims of something vital to their healing. To remedy that, Berman, who is a licensed social worker as well as a judge, scheduled a hearing for a week later. On August 27th, he said he would give any of us who wished to speak the opportunity to address the court. The government would pay for our airfare and hotels. It was short notice, but I was determined to be there, as were scores of others. Because of the enormous media attention and expected attendance, Berman moved the hearing from his usual courtroom to a larger one. Half of the seating was reserved for survivors and their attorneys, and on the day of the hearing, that side of the room was almost full. Siggy and Brad were there, as well as several other lawyers I knew. Berman heard from the lawyers first, and then one by one, 23 of us rose to say what we were there to say. Woman after woman, now in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, told a similar tale of being hurt by Epstein and then struggling for decades afterward as memories of that trauma threatened to derail them. But for all the pain being described, it seemed each woman who spoke took strength from the woman who'd gone before her. Courtney Wild went first, and she set the perfect tone for the proceedings. At 14, she had been a straight A student, the first chair trumpet in her school band, and the captain of the cheerleading squad. Then Epstein began abusing her. Robbing me of my innocence and my mental health, she said. And all her ambitions and achievements went up in smoke. I feel very angry and sad that justice has never been served in this case. Another survivor said she had lost her mother to cancer when she was 11. Afterward, she recalled being approached by a lady when she was playing her violin at a mall in Texas, not far from the New Mexico border. The lady told the girl she knew a wealthy man who lived nearby who'd pay to see her play. This was the beginning of the end of my childhood, the survivor told the court. Shantae Davis, who'd been recruited to be a masseuse for Epstein, recalled how at first she tried to reject his sexual advances, but that seemed to excite him. He ended up abusing her for years, she said. We have all suffered and he is still winning in death, she said. Jennifer Areos said that she was first abused by Epstein when she was 14 and that he forcibly forced himself on her at 15. He stole my chance at really feeling love because I was so scared to trust anyone for so many years, she said, speaking through tears. I'm sorry to anyone that this is upsetting. Annie Farmer, Anushka DiGiorgio, Tila Davies, Teresa Helm, Sarah Ransom, and Marika Chartouni. These might be names you've heard, as all of them have been quoted in media accounts speaking out about what they've been through. But they are only a few of my survivor sisters, as we soon come to call ourselves, who spoke that day. We all shared the belief that by raising our voices, we might comfort and inspire others who weren't yet ready to reveal their own suffering. Several of us thanked the prosecutors who were there for finally assembling a case against Epstein. But I was not the only one to remind them that there were others walking free who should still be held to account. The reckoning must not end, I told the court in my remarks. It must continue. He did not act alone. And we, the victims, know that. We trust the government is listening and that the others will be brought to justice. After the public hearing ended, the prosecutors invited all Epstein's victims to meet with them in a private room. It was an emotional session. Jeffrey Berman, the US attorney, had tears in his eyes as he told us how sorry he was for all we had endured. William Sweeney, the head of the FBI's New York office, thanked us for our presence and both pleaded with us to help them in their ongoing investigations into Epstein's co-conspirators. Siggy and I would soon meet with them, as I know many survivor sisters did. Here's the thing though, it's all very well the FBI wanting you to help them, but too often they're not able to provide the protection that is needed against the victims of this kind of crime, because these people are vulnerable people. That was a point I made several readings ago. They deliberately preyed on vulnerable women, on young girls that already had been through trauma in their childhood. That was their type. So the idea that these were opportunists that were enjoying a high life doesn't add up with their backgrounds. In addition to whatever leads we provided the prosecutors, the hearing and its aftermath resulted in something else that I'd never known to hope for. Being with all those resilient women in one place gave me back a piece of myself that had gone missing. When David Boys and Siggy offered to take several survivor sisters to the US Open, Farmer, Helm, Ransom, Chartouni and I were among those who gathered in Queens to watch a match. As we had dinner together and drank champagne, I felt as if, despite our differences, I could tell these women anything. There was a palpable feeling that each of us understood and supported the others, and it was more than symbolic. Some of us were still looking for answers. For example, Marika Chartouni told me she thought she'd been abused by Epstein around the same time I was. She was trying to identify the woman who'd recruited her. And when she described what the woman looked like, I recognized her instantly as a woman I'd known who was in Epstein's circle for a time. I remembered her first name, but not her last. Mariki, I hope that's how you say her name, is like a detective. She would soon use pattern matching and public records to find what she thought must be the woman's last name. And quickly after that, she found the woman's website and social media accounts. When we looked at the photographs the woman had posted of herself, there was no denying it was her. Because this woman witnessed Marike's assault and participated in it, Marike felt that finding her again, seeing that she still existed, helped defang a trauma that had gnawed at her for years. For weeks after that hearing, I mostly felt jubilant. The way all these strangers had come together like pieces of a huge jigsaw puzzle to comfort one another and help fill in each other's gaps was electrifying. When united, we formed a WhatsApp group chat to keep in touch. We felt as if we had power. Now I know I'm on the right road, I said to Robbie, because look what is happening. In addition to this new form of kinship, the survivor sisters were dealing with a full-on media frenzy. All the women who'd spoken in the courtroom in August were being asked by various news outlets to tell their stories. For me, it started right after Judge Berman's hearing, when I stood in front of the courthouse with a dozen microphones in my face and tried to keep people focused on the wrongs that still needed to be righted. It's not how Jeffrey died, but it's how he lived, I said. And we need to get to the bottom of everybody who was involved with that, starting with Ghislaine Maxwell. I will never be silenced until these people are brought to justice. Before I stepped away from the mic, a reporter asked me whether that included formerly Prince Andrew. He knows exactly what he's done, I said, and I hope he comes clean about it. Soon I did a series of interviews for NBC's Dateline. Several other survivors were also featured. That report would air on September 30th, 2019. Interviewer Savannah Guthrie was tough but fair, and I appreciated how she let me address some people's skepticism. When she said, for example, that during my time with Epstein, I'd been coping by using Xanax, taking substances, drinking. There are going to be people who say, maybe it didn't happen the way you say it happened. I responded like this. I say when you're abused, you know your abuser. I might not have the dates or times right, and the places might not even be right, but I know their faces and I know what they've done to me. Not only that, but if something like that's happening to you and you're conscious, you're going to remember it, even if you are under the influence. People remember operations when they're under anesthetic. Some people. Next, Glamour magazine invited Shartuni, Helm, Ransom, another Epstein survivor named Rachel Benavidez, and me to have a roundtable discussion about what we had been through and our hopes for the future. That feature appeared in the magazine's 2019 issue. In rapid succession, I'd be interviewed on camera by the BBC, good old BBC, and by the producers of Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, a multi-part documentary about Epstein and Maxwell that would eventually air on Netflix. See, I feel like they've kind of steered the conversation away from how this guy acquired his money, because it doesn't seem like he acquired it legitimately. So they've always sort of pictured him as like Mr. Filthy Rich, Mr. Billionaire, but actually he's a criminal for the money transactions as well. But perhaps my most important interview was conducted by Tara Brown of 60 Minutes Australia. She was preparing an extensive report in which she interviewed not only me, David Boys and Siggy, but also Courtney Wild and a lawyer named Spencer Couvin, who represented many other victims of Epstein and Maxwell. As its air date approached in early November, I told Robbie, who would also make a cameo in the report, that I wanted Alex and Tyler, then 13 and 12, to watch it. I felt that at 9, Ellie was still too young. I told Robbie chances were good that some of the boys' friends and their parents might see the report and recognise me. Even though I was known as Jenna, not Virginia, in Australia, they knew my face, and this was going to be on TV in their living rooms. Our sons might get asked about it, I told Robbie. I didn't want them to be blindsided. Honestly, she really comes across as a good parent in this book. But there was another more pressing reason I wanted my sons to watch it. I want them to know what I'm fighting for, to make sure other children don't have to endure what I did, I told Robbie. They've known for a long time that something bad happened. I think they are old enough now to understand. Of course, I knew it would be difficult for the boys to hear the details of my abuse, but those details were the truth, and if the world was going to hear them, I wanted my sons to know them too. I also thought it might be easier for them to understand because 60 Minutes would provide the context for my experience. They would be able to see that their mother wasn't alone. Not in her victimhood, certainly, but also not in her willingness to stand up to those who'd hurt so many. The night the report aired, the 4 of us gathered on the couch to watch. The boys sat silently as Brown walked her audience through Epstein and Maxwell's crimes. They saw footage of the inside of El Brillo Way and photos of me as a young girl. And they heard me and Courtney Wild talk tearfully about what we'd experienced. Importantly, they heard my answer when Brown asked me why, after I was abused the first time by Epstein and Maxwell, I went back a second time to El Brillo Way. As an adult, I know it's right to run, I told Brown. But as a kid who'd been through what I'd been through in my life already, I guess the last thought that I had was, well, this is what life's about. When the report was over, I could tell by the way he was clenching his jaw that Alex was angry. Why did they let that guy get away with hurting so many people, he demanded. It just wasn't fair, he said. Tyler had a different reaction. He'd cried a few times while watching the report, and afterward, he wouldn't stop hugging me. I'm proud of you, Mom, he said. That felt good, of course, but watching alongside my sons stirred up a lot of emotion. On the one hand, I'd never wanted them to be touched by my terrible past. Now they were old enough to know the truth, but it still made me sad. On the other hand, I was happy for the boys to see that I was indeed fighting bad guys, something I was determined to keep doing. As much as this role could sometimes disrupt our family life, I wanted them to know that sometimes even one person can make a difference, and given that possibility, you have to try. Someone said released today. Oh, the Epstein files are released today? No. No, they're not released today. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but we're still a long way off. They are trying to get it passed through Congress to have them released, but then there has to be another vote. So I think they've passed step one. I think one person voted against it. But there's a lot of talk about some of them being destroyed, them being redacted, and it's very unlikely that we're going to see the full extent of those files. I mean, like I was saying, this is an international catastrophe. It's countries that are at war, that have been accused of war, that we're not supposed to be doing business with, that have violated human rights agreements that are made by entities like the UN, and yet people like Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, are doing business deals with them, and our own King Charles is getting cash donations in Fortnum and Mason bags. This is the level we are at here. And for years, it's been dripped in and out of press stories. We've never got the full story. Epstein's amassed a 600 million fortune that he's managed to stash away in the Virgin Islands, by the sounds of it. This is so much deeper than, and these people were pedophiles on top of it, you know. So, yeah. It's like watching a movie, but it's real life. Anyway, guys, I want to leave it there for today. I've appreciated your company. Oh, Senate sends it to Trump's deck. Yeah, it's so weird me listening to all this stuff because, you know, I really wanted to ignore Trump when he got re-elected. I was like, I'm not going to be affected by this, but Elon Musk as well. She, you know, I wasn't expecting her to mention Elon Musk in the book, but yeah, we all know what he got up to with Trump. So, and then I remember when he made a tweet saying, the reason why you're not getting the Epstein files is because Trump's in them. And then he disappeared. Because at that point, he was literally in the White House like every day, like acting like he was part of the US government. And I mean, I take only a fleeting interest in this stuff, but it comes into my radar. So yeah, it's wild. It's all wild. I was going to say one more thing. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Once again, I have said many times that even though I'm reading this book, I still recommend people go out and buy it. Even just that bit there where she was taking us through all the media coverage and how it came about, I still find it such interesting insight, because it makes you wonder about every news report, every media report you see now about this kind of issue, how orchestrated it is, how it's people behind the scenes planning the stance and the narrative they're going to put out and framing it, and I don't want to say controlling, but yeah, they are. They're making sure that the people speaking out are kind of in line with a certain narrative. So yeah, very interesting once again. Thank you all for being here. I will be back soon. I can't come on tomorrow, but maybe in a couple of days I will be back. And I think that will be the last chapter. So I'll see you then. Bye. Take care. Have a great night.